Know that this is an open conversation. You have questions, comments, anything at any point. Floor is open to everybody. So, my name is Eric Fishel. I've been working as a conservation biologist for the past 11 years. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've done, what conservation research is like, and what I'm doing here. So, there are lots of different ways to work in conservation. I personally have specialized in bird research. So first I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the types of data that you can collect while doing bird research. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the types of research projects that happen. Then I'm going to talk about my master's research in particular to get a little bit more down into the nitty-gritty. Then I'll be talking about what we're doing here in Baltimore. So when you're out there studying birds, one of the main things you can do is called mist netting. Mist netting is setting up a big 12-meter net. Birds fly into it, like this curl-crested arcari down here, a very, very cool bird. This lady has a very surprised reaction here because as this man was taking the bird out, its mate decided to attack her and ended up getting stuck in the net at the same time. So after you catch them, that is not in Baltimore. So this is in Peru. So after you take the birds out of the net, we're not just catching the birds for fun, we are doing it, A, to keep track of them. So one thing that you can do is you can put a band on them, which is just a little metal piece that has a number written on it. And in North America, all the bands are standardized, so if you're legally banding, then you have to get them all from one place. So that means if anybody in the whole world catches that bird, they'll know exactly what bird that is. So that way you can keep track of that bird throughout its lifetime if it happens to get caught in someone else's net, which happens surprisingly regularly.
So, Eric,
yes.
How does one, if I see a bird with a band on it, what happens?
So if you just see a bird with a metal band on it, there's
the bird's, my cat got the bird.
Okay, so if you were cat, so that actually is a situation that happens a lot. People find banded birds hit by cars that flew into windows that their cat brings in. Not just wild, but cats in the United States kill 1 billion wild birds a year.
Wow, 1 billion?
1 billion. So what you do is you report it, I believe, to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. If you just Google, I found a banded bird, it'll take you to the reporting site. And you enter in, it might ask for the species, but when the people banded that bird, all that bird's information is already associated with that band. So they'll know it, if you just enter in their 9-letter long codes. If you enter in that 9-letter long code, you'll be able to see where that bird was caught,
really?
How old it was when it was caught, what species it is, all that type of stuff. Yep.
What if I Google the number, just the number?
I mean, if you Google a random number and like bird band.
No, the 9-digit number.
Yeah, if you if you Google that 9-digit number, you'll have to go through a couple of steps, but all that database is public.
Wow.
But you have to.
All researchers have to make their data public?
So you don't have to make your data public, but you do have to make the basic information for the bird that you banded public. So it goes onto the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website through a program called Bandit, and it's not public in the fact that if you just like Google the 9-digit code and say bird band, that like it's going to be the first result. You have to work through the system a little bit, just because for that reason. You don't want your research just super easily getting out there. But most of the research isn't just catching a bird, banding it, and letting it go. There's a lot more complicated. But the other thing that we do is, especially in places like this where we really don't know nearly as much about birds as we do in places like North America, is we take lots and lots of measurements. And those measurements can tell us a lot about birds, such as when they're going to be nesting, and can even tell us enough information that sometimes we figure out that two birds that we thought were the same species are actually different species. So there's a lot of cool information that you can get from catching birds and banding them and measuring them. Another thing that you do when you're out there is just sitting and observing. A lot of information you can get from any wildlife study is just from watching the birds, or watching the animals, or whatever it is. And that doesn't mean that if I go out there, wait for an hour, I'm going to get all the information that I need. This was actually me looking for a bird's nest that took me 10 hours a day, 3 days in a row of just watching the birds to find that nest. And the reason why finding nests are so hard is sometimes nests are impossible to distinguish. These are both bird nests. So right there is the one nest with the bird on the inside of it, and this is a nest. So without following the bird's behavior, there is almost no way you're ever going to find that nest. So you can see little, those are spider webs that they use to hold all the leaves together, and that clump of leaves is a nest. So finding the nest is important to figure out breeding history of birds and things like that. But also, again, in a lot of these places, we don't know what's going on with these nests. So for example, this nest right here, that is a species of bird that before, this is the only one I have this example of, but I discovered that species of bird's nest to Western science. And that is the picture of that bird. Before that, Western science did not know anything about how that bird nested. And that's very, very important, especially for conservation, because if, as scientists were studying a bird, we say, wow, this bird is super endangered, and we want to know how to conserve it, you can't just go in blindly. You have to know the information about it to be able to figure out what you need to do. So obviously we take a lot of measurements. Some birds, surprisingly, so most birds in temperate regions that are, say, like robin size, they lay an egg. The egg takes between 15 and 20 days to hatch. Bird takes between 15 and 20 days to leave the nest. But that's not true of everything. Sometimes some hummingbirds can hatch and leave the nest within 15 days of being laid. Some birds that are just as small as hummingbirds can take a month and a half from being laid to hatching and another month and a half to grow up. So there's a lot of different reproductive strategies that if we don't know what's going on and those birds are starting to be endangered, we have to know what we need to do and what we need to be cognizant of to figure it out. So another example of this is wood storks. So this is a picture of me around 50 meters in the air, so around 150 feet up in the air, working with an endangered wood stork baby. So what we're doing here is, because wood storks are a North American bird, they're fairly well understood, we know what their general reproductive biology is like, so we know how long it usually takes for them to grow after they hatch. But they've been endangered for a long time, so we're trying to figure out if maybe there's something going wrong with their with them being raised from nestlings to adults. So we go back every couple of days and we measure the birds to see if they're growing, to see if they're on track. And if there's a trend that birds are growing slower, then we know, oh, it's from the nesting stage that these populations are struggling. So these are all different types of things that we can do in the field. Other different type of thing you can do is just tracking birds. And these are California condors, and attached to their wings are GPS trackers. So these condors, which we'll talk about more, are very, very special birds that we actually have every single condor, California condor in the world tagged and banded. And the way that we band it is with these things. And this is actually probably pretty close to the actual size of a California condor. They are massive. They stand about that tall. Their wingspan is about twice the length of my wingspan. They are huge birds. But that's all studying ecology and conservation related things. There's all sorts of different types of things you can do. Working with wildlife, you can do auditory working. This guy, Chris Balakrishnan from East Carolina University, was doing a song study on a few birds that we'll talk about in a bit. You can do a lot of photographic studies of birds, and you can even do genomic studies on birds, which we'll also get a little bit more into. And this is all just still with birds. You can also work with insects, or with plants, or with bats, or really whatever you want to work with soils. Anything is really up in the air, but these are just examples of ways that you can study birds for wildlife conservation. So when you're studying the birds, oftentimes you have very interesting living situations. So this was the house that I shared with 10 people for 6 months. So you can see right here, I think I've got a picture of it next actually. Okay, so right here is our kitchen. Up here is all of our food for that 6 months. There is our water tank, which we collect water and then pour some bleach into. Here's our hand washing station. There is our eggs, which we got delivered once a month. And delivery is very, very difficult because we are a 3-day car ride from Cusco, and then you have a tiny town, which we are another day boat ride away from, which we are another day hike away from. So, as you can tell, there's a lot of tricky situations that come up with that in terms of sourcing. This is where we sleep, so everyone brought their own tent, slept underneath a tarp. Sometimes it flooded, you dealt with it. This was where we hung our laundry, and here was where we kept our potatoes. And on the other side, which I think you can see in that first picture, And this was our research table right there. So that is what some of the situations are like living.
So are there people living in that area? Are you guys really isolated? Or?
So this particular one is very isolated. So there is a local village that is, like I said, like a day or so away. But right here, there's really not much. There are a few uncontacted tribes that live in that region, and I have seen one while I was standing on a cliff and looking downriver once, which was super cool. And you'll actually get to see that river in a second. So one of the other interesting things is obviously no electricity, no running water, things like that. So the river was our refrigerator. This was me attempting to make gazpacho, and gazpacho is no good hot, so I wanted to cool it down. So I put the pot of gazpacho in the river with a rock on top of it to make sure it doesn't float away. The river was also our shower. It was our dishwasher. It was our laundry machine. It's everything. So you can't drink out of this water because upstream is Cusco. There's a lot of pollution, especially after the rains. So everything but actual drinking water. This river really did it all for us. There's a lot of other things that you have to deal with when you're living in remote areas. Insects are one of them. So this is one of the bands I was talking about. You can see just the 3 scrawled into it. And obviously we tracked this guy down, but we thought it was hilarious that an ant was trying to steal our research equipment. But the insects do get really, really bad out there. They are by far the biggest nuisance. And this, for example, is what happened. So I hung my sock up to dry for literally 20 minutes, walked past, there was an entire ant colony. That took 20 minutes for ants to make a colony in my sock while it was drying. We also have very invasive insects. Anybody familiar with what these 2 bumps are? It is not a chigger. So these are called botflies. Does anybody know what those are? Yep. So botflies, there's many different species of botflies, including, I think, 3 native species in Maryland, but they don't infect humans in Maryland. And their larvae, they either put it on leaves, or they put it on mosquitoes, or lots of different strategies for it. But their larva gets injected into your skin somehow. The babies grow inside of you, and then a fly hatches out. So that's what these 2 bumps are, is botflies. So we actually extracted them just because you can. So the way you extract them is once they get big enough, you just cover it with duct tape. They have to come up for air. You remove the duct tape and you snag it real quick. Also,
amazing material.
especially in remote tropical areas, there are lots and lots and lots of venomous things. So this is a picture that I took of a green tree viper eating a mouse opossum. So yeah, you just always have to be very, very careful of that. There was a bit of an interesting story about one of our coworkers going out to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, starts going to the bathroom, looks down, and there is a bushmaster, which is the snake responsible for the most deaths of any snake in the world, directly underneath her. Didn't even move the whole time. So it's a situation that you always have to be very aware of. And there are also lots of nuisance animals. If we did not secure our food every morning, brown capuchins would steal all of it. So we had to spend hours securing our food so that capuchins would not get to it. Howler monkeys, 4 in the morning, 3 in the morning, every single morning. Start making a racket, really make your life a little bit harder. But, especially living in remote areas, dealing with all of this is completely worth it because you get to live in some of the greatest places in the world. You get to see some things that are absolutely amazing. So this was our site in Peru. You can see just completely virgin rainforest for miles and miles and miles in every direction. This right about there, right about there is where I saw the non-contacted tribe. So that's a tribe that has never had contact with Western civilization. This was our field site in Malaysia. You have the Pacific Ocean right there. This is the tallest mountain in Southeast Asia. That is a village that specializes in making tea, but you really just get to go out and see some incredible places. The stars are unlike any stars you have ever seen. Even if you go out to like the national parks out here, there's still light pollution from a couple 100 miles away in most of them. But here, you're not near any light for thousands of miles sometimes, because this, for example, was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. There's nothing else around there. You sometimes stumble upon some great gems like this. In the middle of the workday, I found this waterfall, decided to take a break and go swimming. you get to see some truly incredible wildlife. This is a whitehead's broadbill, found in Borneo. This is a Bornean pygmy elephant, smallest species of elephant in the world, but they subspecies of elephant in the world, but they're still very, very large, obviously. Short-nosed tree frog. That frog's about half the size of my pinky fingernail. Not exactly sure what species of butterfly this is, but it is obviously very, very beautiful. But just because you're living in developing nations, just because you're living in a relatively remote place, doesn't mean you have to live quite as rustically as I was showing earlier. For example, this was our living quarters when I was working in Cameroon. Obviously, multiple houses, like all three of those houses that you see were part of our compound. Nice living room, nice place to live. So it's not completely required to do that. This was the town that we were living in when we were working in Samoa, and this was our front yard. So obviously, you don't always have to be living in those cramped tents to work in remote areas. But one of the more fun things to really do when you're living in remote areas is to get creative with your fun. So this was Halloween. Every single thing that we used to build our costume, we found in the forest. So all these leaves and things like that. I'm that one. I was dressed as Kermit the Frog. We also do a great job of getting to know the locals. So this was me playing in the local Peruvian soccer league. So every 2 weeks we took that one-day journey into town to play in the Peruvian soccer league. These were our community members in Samoa. So we went and we talked to some school classes. Samoans are really into Christmas for some reason. So we went and enjoyed so this was on the main island, but this was on the smaller island we were working on. But again, there's lots of opportunities to work with nature in the tropics, but not necessary. This is one of the fields, this is one of the sites for my master's research. This is in Columbia, Missouri. Obviously very accessible. And even in more urban areas, this is me working in Baltimore. This is in Filbert Street Garden. There are lots and lots of opportunities to work in nature that you don't have to go all the way up to the wildlife or all the way up to the jungle to find it. It is where you are. We'll get more into that later.
But the prettiest birds are out there.
Some of them are. There's 350 species of birds that you can find in Baltimore, including almost all the prettiest ones in North America. So now I'm going to get a little bit more into what the types of research that we do as conservation biologists is. So these are the California condors. When I took this picture, this was about 20% of the entire population of California condors. At one point, their population was down to 27, so they had to capture all of them, take them all out of the wild, and start a breeding program. Do any of you know why condors were in such peril? It's a very specific reason. So what do condors eat as vultures?
Carrion.
Yep, dead things. So how do things get dead when there's people around?
Was it lead?
There you go. So people hunt deer, hunt elk, whatever there is out west to hunt. They clean out the entrails, leave the guts. Condors come around, eat the guts. There's a lead fragment in there. They get lead poisoning and they die. So that is 90% of the issue with the condor population. If it wasn't for lead, which is why California made it illegal to have lead bullets, but that's illegal the same way driving over the speed limit, so it's not really enforced. But lead bullets are the almost only culprit. I mean, there's also, especially historically, there was hunting, and there was poisoning historically when people used to poison to keep the wolves and coyotes away. And there's habitat loss, but nowadays, almost all of it is lead poisoning. So 27 originally, when this picture was taken, this was about 20% of the population. There are almost 500 California condors now. So it is a lot of success. So what we do for this is there is a captive breeding program and there's a wild breeding program. So they still breed birds in captivity and release them, but I think there's something like 100 breeding pairs in the wild. And the things that we do to keep their population going up is we do supplemental feeding. So we go to local farms and we take stillborn calves who don't have any antibiotics or whatnot, because if you take, especially on bigger farms, if you take just dead cows, they're going to be full of antibiotics and all that other stuff, and that's terrible for the birds. So just the stillborn calves are the only ones that we take. We do supplemental feeding with those, and also we do yearly checkups where we check for lead levels, and we track each individual one with GPS markers and sometimes not GPS, and we use radio telemetry, which is just a radio signal that you can detect using a little wand. And if a bird starts acting funny, we catch that bird, test it for lead levels. If it has lead poisoning, we take it to the hospital, fix it up. So very, very hands-on conservation that's keeping this bird alive.
Where's that picture taken there?
This picture is taken in just an hour outside of LA. It's Hopper Mountain National Wildlife Refuge. This one is not open to the public though.
North or, that's east. That would be east.
Yeah, this is east of LA.
Yeah, we have, where I'm from, then we have a lot of
Yeah.
the condors. I'm from Tehachapi.
Yeah, so condors now are as far north as Washington State, as far east as Colorado, and as far south as parts of Mexico. So originally their range was even bigger than that. They went almost all the way to the Mississippi, they went halfway up Canada, and they went all the way down Mexico. But their ranges are expanding again, so that's a good thing. So is anybody familiar with what a brood parasite is? So do you guys know what
Cowbirds.
Yep, brown-headed cowbird, exactly. So birds that lay their egg in other birds' nests. So these species, which are of the group Astrildid finches, which if you ever think of a zebra finch, the finches you got by the pet store, they are a group of Astrildid finches. They are the host for some very, very special brood parasites. So each one of these has its own brood parasite. So each one of these species, and this species is now starting to become invasive in California. So each one of these species picks out one of these species, or evolutionarily had picked out one of these species, and only parasitizes that bird's nest. So, the first species developed a mechanism to try to defend against this evolutionarily. So most birds, they just have kind of like a yellow gape on the side of the mouth that says feed me. And cowbirds, for example, have an extra bright yellow gape so that they get fed over the host bird. The host birds here evolved a defense mechanism, which is we're going to have very, very specialized markings in our mouths so that our mothers know only to feed us. So this bird, for example, which is that one. So that bird, these are its babies, and it evolved 3 dots and really bright red on the side of its mouth, so it knows if I see 3 dots and bright red, that's my baby. But when this evolution was happening, the parasite, which is why they started going in one species, evolved with them. So this is actually 2 different species of birds. So this is the host and this is the parasite. You can see really far back, there's 2 extra dots that you could barely see, but the mother or the father usually doesn't see that. So each species of these birds,
Like, how many generations does it take?
evolution can happen surprisingly fast under the right pressures. It can happen in a couple hundred years. It can happen very, very slowly. But that is actually what this project was looking to study. This research is still out, so they are looking at the evolutionary origin of this. And it's specifically what this project was looking at. They were taking genetic samples, specifically RNA samples from young birds, so that they can figure out how this evolved chemically. Yeah, so like each species of that first bird, of the host bird, has its own unique pattern. So instead of red, some have blue. Instead of 3 dots, some have 4 dots. Instead of dots, some have swirls. Instead of swirls, some have lines. So it's really crazy the way that they evolved to that.
So Eric, I thought I heard the word invasive.
Mm-hmm.
So many of these parasite birds, they were brought here.
So this one in particular, this one's the one that is starting to become invasive in California. That's a pin-tailed white-up. And that was brought here as a pet. Someone let it out because they couldn't handle it anymore, and they had a couple of them. They started growing a feral population. That issue is especially a problem in the Everglades because Miami, for whatever reason, is culturally one of the biggest hubs for exotic pet trade. And people get a pet, they're popular for a week, realize they don't know how to handle it, let it go. And having worked in the Everglades for a total of about 2.5 years over the course of 6 years, you can literally see any animal in the world there. I have seen ring-tailed lemurs there. I have seen everything. In the Everglades, you can expect to see anything. It is incredible and sad and amazing all at the same time. Yeah, so a lot of invasives, like for example, house sparrows and pigeons just kind of happen, and some of the rats kind of happen by accident because you have a ship the size of a city coming over. You're not going to be able to get all the little pests out of there. But other ones like starlings and pintail come over a little bit more on purpose. So starlings, so European starlings were actually brought over because in New York City they were opening Shakespeare Park, and the guy who was opening it said, you know what we need to have in Shakespeare Park? Every animal Shakespeare wrote about. So they brought over starlings, tried it 3 times, they died the first 2 times, and then the 3rd time they took over.
That starling story is just so bizarre.
Luckily, all the other animals, because they brought over multiple animals, all the other animals that they brought over, and this was in the 1800s, so all the other animals that they brought over didn't really work out. So, getting a little bit more into the nitty-gritty, we'll be talking now about my master's research, which more or less is looking at what people do in their yard, how that affects the bird and plant communities, and how that translates into the resiliency of human communities to climate change. So a lot of this is going to be pretty scientific and data-y, but this is just kind of showing you where research like this ends up. So our main questions are, what do people do? So we were working out of Columbia, Missouri, and we were looking at just what people do in their yards. We were looking at how these management practices are and where the breeding birds and plants are, and how they differ among different types of neighborhoods in Missouri or in Columbia, and understanding how climate change conditions can really alter what people do in their yards in Missouri. And you can see that our research evolved as this went on. So first of all, we stratified Columbia not by geography, but by social area. So social area analysis is a method where you can stratify your population using multiple different socioeconomic factors. So it's race, it's ethnicity, it's wealth, it's how many generations you've been in this country, it is education, anything that you can think of. You take demographic data, you put it into a social area analysis statistical formula, and it can come up with anywhere from 2 different groups to 1 homogenized group, if that happens to be what it is, to 100, really depending on how deep you want to go in how you're going to differentiate these groups. But we found that there are really 4 main groups in Columbia that, just like a lot of other places in the world, are pretty geographically stratified. So you can see in this area, which is pretty geographically restricted to this area, is just not black, so whites, Hispanics, whatever other things that are not black. Middle income homeowners. Up here tends to be the lower income non-black communities. The central area tends to be lower income black communities. And down here tends to be more or less the high income homeowners, more well educated. There's a lot more details that go on to about it, but that's really the main statistical differentiations between the communities that we came up with.
Have you done that same analysis with Baltimore?
I have not, but the Baltimore Ecosystem Studies has.
Is it much more patchy, I would imagine?
It is. So Baltimore has been very, very deliberately racially segregated and very deliberately classist segregated. So it is actually very easy to observe patterns. And yeah, because like Columbia, much smaller city, relatively newer, based around the college town. So right here is the college. You can see everything kind of spurs off of that. So it's a little bit more organic, still a little bit structured, but Baltimore, you can very much see very deliberate decisions. But yeah, if you are interested in that, look up Baltimore Ecosystem Study, and they have a lot of information on that. So what we did is we selected 100 points that were evenly stratified here, so 25 points in each social area, and we conducted a whole bunch of different surveys in them. So bird strip transect counts, what that means is each one of our points is actually a transect. That is 100 meters by 100 meters. So each one of those 100 meters was centered on a street, You would start on one end of the street, take 7 minutes, walk slowly to the other end of the street, and you would count each individual bird that you heard or saw. And you would do that 3 times a year, and we did that 3 times. So that way we have a pretty good idea of what birds were around. Then we do visual line intercept surveys. So on those plots, which are 1 meter or 100 meters by 100 meters, sometimes that is one person's house, sometimes that is 20 homes, sometimes it's an apartment building. You're not going to have access to all of them, but you do have access to the street. So what you do is you start at the beginning, look this way, look in a straight line. Whatever plants intersect your exact straight line, you record information about that. Walk 5 meters, look the other way. Report all the information about all the plants you see there. So that way you get a general idea of what's on the ground there. It's not super specific, but it's a general idea of the plants that are on the ground. GIS estimate covers, that doesn't really tell us much about the specific plants that are there, but it tells us what the structure is. So we can look at a GIS layer, which is more or less a satellite image, and we can say, that's impervious, that is tree cover, that is grass. And there's a couple other categories like water, but those are the main ones that we get. Then we have backyard microgarden surveys. So we had exactly, somehow, 1,000 households that ended up on our transects. So what we did is we sent out mailings saying, hey, would you let us come out to your backyard and do a very specific survey as to the plants that are in your backyard. So once they said, okay, I believe we had around 280 of those 1,000 that said we can go into their backyard and do it. There's lots of different ways that you can do vegetation surveys, especially in urban areas, because in the woods it's much easier to just pick a random sample, get a relatively representative sample of what vegetation's out there. But in someone's backyard, you could have something like that sofa, like say this room is someone's backyard. That sofa is the only place that person planted anything, and the rest of it is lawn. Very, very common to happen in backyards. Say you randomly sampled here, you're very unlikely to get that one tiny place, which is the only place they actually did anything, in your sampling. So what microgarden surveys does is say, that place where they planted plants is maybe 10% of their yard, so we will make sure that 10% of our random points end up somewhere in that area. So it's not as random, but it makes sure to actually get what is representative of their yard into your survey. So that way, and so yeah, there's good and bads about it. It's not random, so you are biasing your results to an extent, but you're biasing it for a reason. You're biasing it to make sure you actually get an idea of what people are putting in the ground in their properties. And then we have mailing questionnaires. The mailing questionnaires asks a whole bunch of different questions along the lines of things as simple as, how often do you mow? How often do you spray chemicals? Do you like using your yard for barbecues? Do you like using your yard just because it's pretty? So it just asks people really basic questions about how they manage their yard, and also asks people about what they like in their yard. So it's a pretty basic questionnaire that just kind of gets at what people like to see in their yard and what they do to get their yard that way.
How do you know the issue of renting versus owning? Because in some of those areas you run out a high proportion of renters who really aren't making those choices.
Exactly.
Right?
So one of the parts of the question is, do you rent or own? But also that does go into the analysis, right? So knowing whether or not someone rents or owns that house is actually a really easy thing to find out, even if they don't respond to the questionnaire, because it takes a while to find it, but every single municipality has a server that has every single property in that municipality. You click on it, it says who owns the house, where the owner's address is, whether it's owner occupied. Very easy. A lot harder to find that database, but once you do, it's very easy to look it up. And that all goes into the statistics of how we analyze what people do in their renovations plan.
Okay.
Yep.
But you're talking to the renters, you're not talking to the owners of those properties, right?
Yeah.
They're
So
the ones making the decisions.
well, it depends. Like some homeowners, who are renting, especially in a place like Columbia, they just rent to someone for a long term, and they say, you have a garden, go for it. Other homeowners are much more strict about what they do, and that all does go into our analysis of what happened. So now into the much more sciencey part of it. So this is called a Bray-Curtis dissimilarity index. So what we did is we took every single individual bird that we saw in each one of those 100 plots. So each one of these points is one plot. The colors represent the different colors in social areas. For this part, it doesn't really matter that you know what the social areas are. And we graphed them using a statistical method called Bray-Curtis dissimilarity index. And what it does is it shows how each individual point differs from one another in the specific parameter that you're looking at. So the further apart the points are on this, the more different they are in bird community. Now this one we did a 2D graph, so mainly because there wasn't a third axis that really showed strong differences amongst the points. So for example, these 2 points are really far apart, but on this first axis they're actually very, very close. So what that means, on axis 1, we have a positive correlation of tufted titmouse and eastern wood pewee, and negative correlation of European starling and house sparrow. So what this means is, going this way, you get more urban birds, birds who like using cities better, and going this way, you have birds who like more natural areas better, right? So these 2 points don't really differ in whether or not it's urban or it has a more urban bird population or more city or more natural bird population. But these 2 points are really different. So this one's like super, super urban birds. Like we probably only got starlings and sparrows and maybe a robin or something like that. And this one we probably got crazy diverse species of birds. Now the second axis, what it shows is barn swallows and red-winged blackbirds going up, and black-capped chickadees, eastern wood pewees, and cardinals going down. And what that shows is this is open habitat, and this is wooded habitat, because these are birds that like open habitat. These are birds that like wooded habitat. So you have open habitat, wooded habitat, urban habitat, and more natural habitat. And this just shows how each of the individual points differ within that environmental space that we created, showing the differences in the bird communities. Yes?
I was looking at it, it's
okay.
like that portion of city and forested is just not there.
Yeah, so city and forested down here it's pretty,
Naturally.
and then you can see it's a little bit harder. We're not going to get too much into it here, but even though the dots look kind of all over the place, you can see, for example, blue tends to be all to this side.
Yeah.
Pink tends to be a little bit more spread out, and you have orange, which has almost nothing into the open. It's almost all wooded. Even though there aren't statistically significant correlations with this, there are patterns that we can use to extrapolate on what that means.
So you did this with pairwise with every species that you observed?
So it's not with every
Or
species. So this
just
is
representatives.
So we didn't pick the representatives. We let the statistics pick the representatives. So what we do is we put in every single individual bird that we counted, and it plots it based on this, based on the differences in the bird communities.
Okay.
And these numbers here show how strongly each one of those species correlated with the axis. So if, for example, American robin came up and its R value was 0.05, that's not a strong statistical analysis. So these are the birds that statistically significantly correlated with each axis. So that's how we picked the birds that were representative of each community. So then we go and we look at what the cover looks like. So pretty much what we have is something pretty similar. So axis 1, lots of impervious surface and lawn, so pretty much streets, grass. Axis 2, lots of trees, shrubs, all that type of stuff, right? So this isn't particularly necessarily saying urban versus exurban, but a lot of this could actually be new development, because especially in the Midwest, new development means you have a forest, you chop it down, you lay down grass. And this could be old development, but that's just an example. Over here, axis 2, positive correlation, artificial surface ground cover, and impervious ground cover. That's the city. That is where there isn't grass, isn't trees, isn't really much of anything. And then the negative correlation is grass, ground cover, and lawn, because even though the trees would fit into that, the thing that really stuck out on this particular parameter is the grass and lawn, because there just is more grass and lawn in this particular differentiation between the points. And you can see that there are more points here because there are more places. Oh no, this is transit, so this is still 100, yeah. So I was getting a little ahead of myself. I'm not actually going to show you it. So then, if you actually combine these, what you can do is you can see how, so this is, again, this is the same graph as this one, but then we associate those same factors from this graph. So this graph just shows how different the points are by cover. And we take these data points, so the score of, so for example, the score of artificial ground surface cover, right? Each place has a score, and for example, if it's 100, that means it's a completely artificial ground surface cover. And we associated that with the birds. So then what we see is that there is a positive correlation with lawn cover, which is obvious, because remember, if you up was the open areas. That means that with this information, we know not that all these places are native prairies and beautiful places like that. It's lawn. That's what's happening. It's all lawn. And on the bottom, it's canopy cover, trees and shrubs cover, woody plant species richness, which is very important. So down low, we also know that it's not just a couple street trees, it actually is more forested place. So that really gets us to showing how plants are really interacting with the bird species and how all the cover interacts with that. So the other thing that we're going to bring in, so that we can bring everything together, is the survey data. So to do the survey data, what we do is we look at principal components. So again, that is bringing all the survey questions together and using statistics to figure out which groupings of questions explain the difference between which respondents. And it doesn't necessarily separate the respondents into very specific categories. What it does is says there's these different questions that different groups answer differently. So for example, the first component, which explained almost 20% of the differences that did exist in the surveys, was pretty much, you can see all these numbers are negative. So it pretty much separates those who found many elements of their yards important from those who didn't. So you hand out a survey, someone says, is nature important to you? Very. Is recreation important to you? Very. All that stuff. And they just checked off everything. Separates those people from the people who were more selective about what they enjoyed in their yard. The second component is really just showing, so here you actually do have positive score there and 2 positive scores there. And you can see there's a theme with these positive scores: environmental value, wildlife use of yard, and habitat for wildlife, versus mode log, decoration, reaction, recreation, social activities, not having weeds, open lawn with woody veg. So it really just shows the people who want near yards for social reasons from those who want environmental friendly yards. So that particular component separates those respondents. Third one, you can see again has one difference, so using exercise in the yard versus having all this stuff. So it differentiates people who use their yard for recreation versus those who just want a pretty yard. And the fourth principal component, you have the one positive here, so space for recreation, and cultivating fruits and vegetables versus decoration, nature experience and ease of maintenance. So those who found they actively use their yards versus those who really just want it for decoration and even experiencing nature. So that's how, those are just some of the ways that explain about 50% of the variation within our respondents that we can actually separate those respondents. So bringing it all together, we found that residents who valued their yard for decorative purposes, they did more management, so they mowed more, they watered more, they weeded more, they did all that type of stuff. While those who valued it more for environmental aspects, active use, and obviously ease of maintenance, just happened to do less. We then take all of that and associate it with the birds. We found that bird populations that happen to work with starling, so more of those urban birds. So greater starling abundance is associated with yards where residents manage less and find the aesthetics of their yard to be important. So that's just people who just want a nice, pretty, neat yard and don't really do that much. And cardinal abundance, which is a little bit more of a natural type of place, was associated with yards where residents preferred environmentally friendly yards. And looking here again, you have yards with greater ornamental and forest microgrowing cover, or greater species richness, and native plant percentage are associated with yards where residents found environmental aspects important. And yards with more lawn cover are related with those who didn't really care about nature. So people who said nature, not that big of a deal, just generally tended to have lawns, just grass. One of the more interesting parts, we asked people, very simply, how many, or what percentage of the plants in your yard are native? And we compared that to the actual studies where we were able to go into their backyards. And I believe we had 187 yards that overlapped, where we both got responses and did diligent surveys in those yards. And what we found is there is no statistical significance and actually a slight negative correlation with the actual value of that. So what that means is people have no idea what's in their yard. People think, well, I got lots of native plants, probably they have no idea. So bringing all of this together, a lot of data, a lot of statistics, a lot of correlations, really what it goes to show is there's a couple groups of residents that we can kind of like bring together. One of those are who are all about environment, yay. They tend to manage less intensely, they tend to have yards with more abundant, diverse, and greater percentage of native trees and shrubs, and they tend to have a greater diversity of birds. The other thing that we found is the others, who weren't just people who, it wasn't people who hated the environment. There was no one who was like, environment bad, but some people value more of the aesthetic values of their yard. They tend to manage more intensely. They had yards with less abundant, diverse, and lower percentage of native tree cover, shrub cover, and they had a lower diversity of birds. So what does this all mean? So bringing all of this together, it really reaffirms the fact that community outreach is an essential tool to helping not only people accomplish what their goals are in their yards, but to increase the resiliency of the communities that those yards are in. And it also, which I didn't really get into the science of it here, but it did, because we looked at specific communities, it highlighted which communities were the most in danger of succumbing to the pressures of climate change, less resilient. Because especially in the Midwest, that means lots of drought, lots of flooding. And if you don't really have a healthy environment, which in urban areas, that means your yard, you're going to be very, very susceptible to that. And that can have a lot of negative health and financial impacts. So yeah, bringing all that together, it just means if we are interested in promoting not just wildlife, but people being happy with their yards and people saving money and being healthier with all the changes coming with climate change, we need to talk to people more. That's what all of this data and correlations, that's what it all comes down to. And all this information can help us figure out exactly how we can talk to people, because if we just project what we think people are thinking of their yards, that might not work. But if we can see, oh wow, if people care about using their yards for barbecue more, we can help them accomplish this goal by helping them be conserving better. We can help talk to them in ways that matter to them. So that is my master's research. Does anybody have any questions about that?
What other easy things that you could suggest to people to do that would make a big impact, like educating them what is a native plant? And,
Yeah.
you know, you can have your gorgeous yard, but could you plant a couple of these bushes in the corner?
Yeah. So that, I mean, this project didn't specifically go into action plans. That's a little bit above the level of research I was doing here, but it really did show what needs to be done and why it needs to be done and where it needs to be done. But yeah, there's a million different ways of figuring out how to engage the community. But this is just kind of getting the data on why it needs to be done and why you can't just say, it's better for the environment, you should do it. So moving on from that, we're going to talk about what I am doing here in Baltimore. So I've started Baltimore Food Parks, and as we mentioned, the food parks part is a little bit on hold until things start coming together a bit more for that. But mainly what we're doing here is we're helping communities who don't really have access to any sort of nature or any sort of conservation ideas. We're helping bring that to them through the lens of bird science. And growing from that, we are going to start not only providing, but also guiding interested community members to conservation employment and research opportunities around the world. Because like you saw in the beginning, I've been around the world studying birds. I have a lot of connections with that. If people are interested and aren't interested in working with me, I can help them get connected with the people who they might be interested in working with. So, we will be piggybacking off of a program run by the Smithsonian Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center called Neighborhood Next Block. This program is one of the longest, more scientifically driven community science programs that is in existence. It's been going since the 1980s. The way it works is scientists like myself or like Bob Reithma right there, who now runs the project, we go to people's yards. These people signed up to participate. We catch birds in their yards and we band them. So this project is happening in all over the eastern US and actually one site over in Denver. So these are all the cities where they're working in. Because of the way that they designed this project, Baltimore, because it's in a 100-kilometer circle, is part of Washington, D.C. So this is the type of data that they get from research like this. So there's a lot of other data that they get with this. There's a really, really interesting paper that came from this study about the evolution of bird song in cities. But this is the basic data that they're trying to get, which is just looking to see how bird survivorship differs amongst certain species in urban versus not urban areas. So what they found so far, at least in 2015, was birds like gray catbirds and northern cardinals. In the cities, their populations actually do better. They survive better. You have birds like Carolina wrens and house wrens that do a little bit worse in cities. And you have birds like robins who do not that great in the wild, not that great in cities, but do very, very well kind of in between, usually in the suburbs, which makes sense. You go to the suburbs, there's someone's lawn with 1,000 robins on it. So that's the general idea of what we're doing. If we're able to see how birds' populations are doing, not just comparing them from city to city, or I'm sorry, from city to ex-urban area, but also looking at how they're working over time, it helps gives us an idea of how we need to act to conserve these birds, especially in urban areas, because urban areas are growing a lot, and it is very, very important to preserve overall biodiversity, to preserve biodiversity in cities. So the way this research works is you set up a mist net. This is a mist net. There are those 12-meter long nets I was talking to you about before. You catch a bird. You put these bands on them. This is where the research starts to get a little bit different and community-driven. So every single one of the species that we're working with is going to get a unique color combination. So for example, this one, which I believe is a chickadee, has orange aluminum, that's the metal band with the number written on it, red and red. So you're out, you're looking at birds, or just because you like it, or you're out looking at birds looking for a project. You see this chickadee with orange, aluminum, red. You write that down, we know that bird is still alive. That information alone, over a long enough period of time, with enough participation and with enough birds that we've banded, will be able to give us bird survival rates and thus bird population estimates throughout the city. So the next step after we put the bands on is to look for the birds. If we put these color bands on and say our job is done, the job's not done. We didn't really get any of the data that we're looking for. So this project, in order to be a scientific success, has to really take place over many, many years. So the birds that we are working with are all very common, very easy to see birds in Baltimore, depending on the neighborhood that you're in. A lot of the neighborhoods that I'm working in, these guys don't exist. Some of the neighborhoods I'm working on, these guys are everywhere. Same with chickadees. So we have American robin, northern cardinal, song sparrow, northern mockingbird, gray catbird, Carolina chickadee, Carolina wren, and house wren. So where do we fit into this project? Obviously, the Smithsonian has been doing this project for years, having great success at it scientifically, reaching a lot of families. There's a lot of shortcomings with this program. First of all, they reach out to families who own property, who own houses. That's going to be very, very restrictive, not only with the types of people that you're engaging, but the type of space that you're getting the data from. There's not too many super, super urban properties that you can think of that you can just go to a family's home, use just their lawn, and get a good representation of an urban area. So,
Is there 12-foot net out?
12-meter net.
12-meter,
Yep.
yes.
Yep.
I mean, in the city?
Yep, exactly. So they're missing a lot of really, really actually urban areas. The other thing is, if you just put out a flyer and say, hey, people who are interested in birds, sign up for this program, you're completely missing the opportunity to engage in people who don't have access to this. The people who are signing up for this are probably families who are already interested in birds, already have opportunities to engage with wildlife, already know a lot about nature, and you're really just kind of preaching to the choir, reinforcing what advantage those families already have, and really just leaving the other people who don't have access to any of this further behind. The other thing they're really missing out on is the way that they work is they go to a house once a year, they show up super, super early, the family's usually still asleep, they catch some birds, the family wakes up 2 hours later with a cup of coffee, says, hey, how's it going? You show them a couple birds, family goes inside, you come back next day. You leave the machine. That's great. If the family's engaged, they're going to keep participating. But you're missing the opportunity to really get people excited about nature, to really engage with the community. So we're filling in all of that by A, working in only urban areas. So we're working only in urban Baltimore. We're working only with community groups, so that can be whatever. It can be Baltimore Underground Science Space. It can be schools. We're working directly with 4 schools and indirectly with a bunch of other schools. We're working with churches. We're working with community centers. So we're working in urban community spaces, and we're not just showing up once a year. We're doing these projects. So this was actually right down the street at Amazing Grace Church, which is around 1 mile that way. And this was with an after-school group of about 10 kids. And yeah, we are coming out we're coming out at most once a month and doing physical bird banding. So there is actually a cardinal in that bag, and we're about to teach them all about the cardinal. So not only are we coming out once a month, so that can be as many as like 6 times a year, because we can't do this in the cold. And if it rains, then we miss out on opportunities, so all that other stuff. But I come out and do presentations like this. I teach people about birds when I'm not catching birds with them. I lead bird walks when we're not catching birds or not doing lectures. So I am there for the community to help them keep them excited, help them know that we're there for them, which is great for them because they get excited about it. But it also means that we're going to get better data for this science. So it really fills in the gaps of we're just here to collect the data, participate if you like, and we're probably mainly just going to be preaching to people who already have access to this. So this really fills in the gaps of where it's lacking as a environmental justice program, where it's lacking as a community outreach program, and honestly, where it's lacking as an urban research project. It is in my opinion, suburban research project that calls itself urban because they are working in suburban yards mostly. So where are we working? These are our current sites. So we have a lot of sites around the city. I am kept very, very busy. So Filbert Street Community Garden, I believe is that one. And that's where you saw the picture of me earlier, I believe. We have Carenbury Nature Center, we have a church over here, that's a high school, that's an elementary school, that's a Baltimore City Park. Actually, both of these are Baltimore City Parks. Patterson Park, here is Bugs, here is a after-school elementary school, or after-school middle school program that we're also working with the surrounding churches and the National Aquarium on. This is that church I was talking about earlier, so right down the road. This is a urban garden, or an urban farm. This is a elementary school. This is a brand new Baltimore forest called Fairwood Forest. Just got its dedication, I believe, 2 weeks ago. And this one is the only one outside of Baltimore by around 10 feet, and that is Maryland Natural History Society. So those are all the sites we're working in. We are available to go to other communities to talk, to give bird walks to, but these are all the places that we're doing the bird science. We are physically catching the birds around once a month at each one of those places. Oh, I missed these two, Druid Hill Park and Baltimore Free Film. So we're physically going out, catching birds with community members. Every time we catch birds, it's a community event. We want anyone and everyone to come and join, especially the people who live in that community. And the reason why we want people who live in that community to come out, not just because we pick these areas, because they have an underserved community who really needs access to this to address so many issues, but for the science. If you have people coming in from Baltimore County to come out to watch bird banding, then they go back to Baltimore County, they're never going to see that bird again. The people in the community are the ones who are going to see it. So we really, really encourage people from the community to come out. So with that in mind, we are planning on working in Jenny Street Park on June 7th.
So that's a park right
That is the
there.
park right there.
Yeah.
Looking today, it is questionable as to whether or not it is still a Baltimore City Rec and Parks park. Just based, because I talked with Rec and Parks a week ago, they said that's still our park, go for it. I was looking for pictures of it today. I saw articles saying the city's selling it for $1. Gonna look into it more. I believe it's still a Rec and Parks park, but
For $1, I'll buy it.
but apparently it was a whole issue. There was a big community meeting to protest it.
Protest the sale?
Protest the sale, yeah. So we'll look into it a little bit more because, like I said, we just looked into that today. I still imagine it's a Rec and Parks place. If it is, we have full permission to go out there and do it. To find out more about this event and this event specifically, you can look on the Bugs website, or however Bugs decides to advertise, and they will advertise it accordingly. And for that event and all future public events, so for example in schools and after school groups, I can't just invite the public. That violates all the agreements I've made with them. So those are private, but all the public events that I have, all of the events are going to be posted to the Facebook page. So if you look up Baltimore food parks, you have to have food parks as one word, otherwise it does not come up. You can find all of our events, see pictures, see news.
So what time you get it? So I guess these bird bandings probably have to happen pretty early in the
So
morning?
that is part of what we're doing, which makes it unique. So usually when you go out and do these bird bandings anywhere in the world, you go out a half hour before sunrise and you catch until around 10 or 11 a.m. These are community events. It is a very, very rare person who, especially our target audience, which is people who aren't interested in wildlife already, is going to wake up at 4:30 in the morning to come out and catch birds with us if they already don't really care that much about birds. So we want to make these as open as we can to the community, and that's really up to the people in the community to let me know how they want it. So, for example, Maryland Natural History Society, we rotate every month. So we do the second Tuesday of every month. And the first one we do from 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. Or 7:30 a.m. Yeah, 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. And then the next month we do 5:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. For example, Carrie Murray Nature Center, we do 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., which is their hours on Sunday anyway. Other places we kind of play it by ear. Filbert Street Community Garden, they had an Easter egg hunt. I came out before the Easter egg hunt and caught birds. They're having a community barbecue in a couple weeks. I'm going to come out to their community barbecue, catch birds before them. So other ones, it's play it by ear, however we can get the community involved. So yes, catching birds early in the morning, way better for catching birds, but because we're coming back once a month over and over and over and over again, we're still probably going to, even if we have a terrible day, we're still probably going to catch 1 or 2 birds. That's really all that matters for engagement. And for the science, we need between 3 and 5 birds at each site. If we're just out there one day a year and we catch 1 bird, it's terrible. We're out there 6 times a year. We catch 1 bird, which is, I've done a bunch of events for this, and we haven't caught only 1 bird that we've banded at any of the sites, even at really, really terrible hours. Oh, and the other thing I meant to mention is we have already had 25 events, and we've had so far, 756 community members come out to those events.
Oh, excellent.
So yeah, so the exact timing is really specific to the community's needs. And it's perfectly fine with the science because we do eventually catch enough birds for the science to actually get rolling. Yeah, and then the other thing that you can do to follow me, or to follow this project, is look up on Instagram Birds of Urban Baltimore. And it's pretty much literally just pictures of birds in Baltimore that I took. So for example, this was taken yesterday at Francis Scott Key Elementary School down in Locust Point. That's a bird that I caught. And this is a bird that I caught in Patterson Park. These are all birds that we worked with around here. The first one is a cedar waxwing. This one is a ovenbird, which is a type of warbler. And this one is a tufted titmouse. So that is what we are doing here. So thank you for your time. And do you have any questions?
I was hoping you would elaborate more on how the specifics of bird conservation and the plant conservation is going to immediately impact climate change for the residents that you're aiming it at.
So it's not impacting climate change.
I'm sorry, the words that you used are what I meant to repeat.
Yeah, so it's impacting resiliency to climate change. So for example, I'll start off at relatively light to pretty extreme. So you want a pretty yard, right? Your idea of a pretty yard is grass. You plant a whole bunch of Kentucky bluegrass. There is 10 years of drought. Your grass is brown. If you plant a whole bunch of native grasses, it's not going to be as vibrant green when there's lots of rain. But during the drought, your grass is going to be just as bright green. So that is the lower end of the resiliency. Now here is the much higher end of the resiliency. Especially in the Midwest, you can think of flooding. Out in California and West, you can think of it with fire, whatever. All of these are events that are exacerbated by climate change. If you have more naturally better maintained yards in the Midwest, that involves more wetlands, more native plants, more big trees to soak up water. Out west, that means not having as much brush, probably having a lot less woods. You're not going to have nearly as bad effects from flooding and from fire. And it's everything in between. So this project in specific in Baltimore isn't really looking to address the resiliency. It's trying to get people excited about nature so that they can start taking the actions to help become more resilient. And that's only one aspect of what environmental justice means for people who don't really get nature in their lives. One of it is there's social and psychological benefits that directly impact health.
Yeah.
Not just of nature being around you, but of you noticing it. One thing you'll notice is a lot of people who work with underserved communities say, they don't have nature, let's take them to nature, put them on a bus, bring them out to Oregon Ridge. Nature's here. There's 350 species of birds in Baltimore. There are foxes that I've seen got stuck in the middle of Charles Street. Nature's here. You just have to look for it. So there's all those psychological benefits to it. There is cleaner water, cleaner air that comes from it. There is lost opportunity both in work and in recreation that comes from not experiencing and not excited about nature. So there is so many different ways that not knowing that nature is there and not being exposed to nature can very drastically affect your health, your money, your economic situation, and your life. And doing a project like this really attempts, I'm not going to say we've done much yet, but it attempts to hope to even things out, in that aspect at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just think it's really, say what you will about Mr. Soros, that it's really farsighted to fund a project like this. I mean, it's just really amazing.
Yeah. So this project, well, not this project, so I personally am currently funded for the next 12 months, but for a total of 18 months by the Open Society Institute of Baltimore, which if you're not familiar with it, what they do is they have people just apply for fellowships. And what you're doing is you are saying, this is my dream, this is what I want to do, this is why I want to do it, this is the impacts I think it'll make, this is the specific communities I want to work in. And you don't give, like, for example, most fellowships and grants you apply for, you say, this is our budget, this is our exact target things. You just say what your dream is. Say how you want to impact Baltimore and make it a better place. You get very heavily scrutinized in so many ways as to how you're going to accomplish it and how it's going to be successful. And if you are one of the lucky 10 each year, they fund you personally. So they don't fund your project. They pay you salary for 18 months so that you can get your project either up and running or help it keep going so that your project becomes a more permanent thing. So it's not only my job and all of the other fellows' jobs for these 18 months to do the things that happen in my project, but it's also our jobs to make sure that what we're doing in our project doesn't just stop at the end of the fellowship, that it continues beyond. So it really frees you up to give you the opportunity to make this thing a permanent thing, whatever it is. And in my case, it is bringing bird science to people in Baltimore.
So what are the biggest obstacles you've seen? I guess this has been 6 months you've been going with it?
Yeah, so most of the obstacles I've run into so far have happened recently because for the first 4 months, it has been winter. It was winter.
Yeah.
You can't really go out in communities and catch birds.
Yeah.
One obstacle was quite literally on Saturday. I was setting up a net in Patterson Park for their big birding weekend. Put my bag down, set up the net. A guy on a bike comes by, picks up the bag, and runs off with it. Long story short, I was able to recover the bag by combing the alleys. He stole some random research equipment, but we couldn't ban birds that day because he stole the equipment. My wallet and keys were also in that bag, and I was able to recover those very luckily with another crazy part of that story. So that is one.
Urban wildlife.
Yep, that is one obstacle, which honestly is a very rare obstacle. I know it happens in Baltimore, but if you're diligent, it's like I probably should have had it a little closer to me, but it happened. The other obstacle that I'm personally seeing, like I said, we've had 25 events with 756 people out here. We're getting a lot of people. It's hard to get people who, because there's a lot of people, especially who don't have exposure to conservation of nature, there's a lot of people who are adamantly against it. Because what they see is, they see what they see on TV and they say nature is dangerous. If I go out in nature, I'm going to get attacked by a bear. Nature is where the shady things happen in my neighborhood because there's an abandoned lot with a bunch of trees. That's where the drug dealing happens. And we get a few of the people that are really our target to come out. And every person that's come out has been super excited, super into it. And we do have a few people, especially in the schools, because I am working with schools, so a lot of these school children don't really have a choice, who start off kind of against it, and then once they see it up close, I believe one of my favorite quotes was from a high schooler who said, quote, "Man, you're going to make me a bird biologist, aren't you?" Yeah, so like the people who come out, super stoked, but really just getting the people who don't have that interest already ingrained in them to come out is a little bit of a challenge that we're working on. Those are probably our, and then I haven't really started tackling this issue, but I just barely started it, but future funding. That is the other issue that I'm going to have to deal with. We don't really have any costs. Until we start developing that green space, all of my research materials are provided for free from the Smithsonian. The only cost is me getting paid. Until we start expanding programming, that is our only cost at the moment. So that is a big hurdle I'm going to have to start tackling very soon.
So what has been the most successful, like, verbal or getting the community involvement that you're looking for, getting the people, your targets, the ones with no interest? What has worked getting them to be interested?
So far the most success I've had is going to those school groups and after school groups and getting the kids who are kind of forced to be there to come. But what happens after that? Because the kids, against nature, whatever, they've been raised that like nature's a bad thing, it's something you should stay away from. They go and have this experience, it's really great, and they go and tell their parents. Their parents start to get curious, and it hasn't happened yet because it's still school year, but we're already starting to arrange some events during the summer with the parent-teacher organizations, with parents who have explicitly told me that this is not something that they want to be interested in, but the kids are already super excited. So that is one of the really good success, because it really is about getting that one community member out first, giving them a great experience, and because me telling community members what I'm giving you is great doesn't really mean much. Community members telling other community members what I experienced is great, come experience it with me is really the thing that we're striving for. And students are a great resource to getting that started.
So what's next? You give them this experience.
Yeah, so what's next is
For them, for the community.
Yeah, so I actively stay in that community, so this isn't a one-time experience. I do this once a month, I lead bird walks, all that type of stuff. Starting next year, funding dependent, we will be offering paid internships over the summer for students and young professionals. So a student here or there, a young professional, in a family is like, wow, this is amazing. Let me get on board. We're going to offer them opportunities. Hopefully, eventually, those become more full-time jobs. I will also, having worked in all these places with all these groups, people who are interested in, for example, there was a student at Green Street Academy who was super interested in working with insects. I was immediately able to give him the direct phone number and email address of multiple insect biologists, because he was just like, I don't know, I'm looking at insects, I'm working for the one company that I know that works with insects. Get him connected, send off emails to the people that I know and say, this kid's great, give him a shot. There's that. And head in the sky dream is we get, over the years, a cohort of students, young professionals, between 5 and 10 kids who are super, super into it. We get them super involved into this. And not only do they participate in this project, but because I have all these connections around the world with research, I'm able to, and also selfishly so I get to do it, I am able to bring them for 2 or 3 weeks to one of these tropical research places and have them experience it firsthand. And get to see what it's like to live in the field, what it's like to work with in real life, not just in urban research, which is great, but tropical research, which has a huge hump to get over to actually get started in. So not only do they get to experience it, I got really lucky with tropical research because I happened to get a paid job in tropical research as one of my first jobs. Almost every single tropical research job says either must have 2 years working in tropical research, or the job is come gather data for us and pay us $2,000 to do it. But just giving them these 2 to 3 weeks out in the tropics of doing research, I mean, this is still years off, still need to get that cohort, still need to get funding behind that, but it's part of what I hope to deliver to the community members, is actually being able to give them the experience and the professional experience that'll be able to get them jobs. So that is, so not just getting people excited, getting people connected with nature, giving people connections for research and employment opportunities, but hopefully actually directly delivering more experiences and job trainings. So that's what I'm hoping to deliver. Right now it's just catching birds and getting people excited about that.
Yeah.
Hopefully it grows through that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's very cool. So I have questions about, does the banding, does it harm the bird at all?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there are a lot of different ways to mark a bird. So banding has been done for literal millennia.
Yeah.
People have pet birds, they put bands on them. People have falconry, they put bands on them. People have passenger pigeons, messenger pigeons, they put bands on them. Songbirds are obviously a lot smaller than all these things. So songbirds have recently started being banded in the past couple hundred years. So still hundreds of years of data to back this up, but banding has very, very minimal impact if done correctly on helping birds. Obviously, if you're inexperienced and you break the bird's leg, or you put the band on crooked, or you leave the band a little bit open, that can have some negative impacts. But
just the weight of the band
so
doesn't slow the bird down?
All 4 of those bands, for the biggest bird that we band, so like a blue jay, for example, weigh about 1 gram. Blue jays will weigh around 80 grams. So it's literally just walking around with a wristwatch. For the small birds who weigh about 10 grams, their bands weigh about 1/4 of a gram to 1/2 gram. It's the equivalent of you walking around with a wristwatch. Sure, you notice it, but it's not going to slow you down. And the research shows that if banded properly, there is not zero, but almost zero negative health impact to the birds. There are other ways that people mark birds. One of the bigger breakthroughs, or so people thought, was a geolocator. Because ideally, if you want to try to track a bird, you want to put a GPS on that bird. It'll tell you exactly where that bird's going. Some birds weigh 8 to 10 grams. GPS, even if it weighs 4 grams, not going to work. So a geolocator was this tiny, tiny little device that weighed about 1 gram, between 1 to 2 grams. And all it does is it doesn't send out the data anywhere. It just tracks the daylight hours to the second. That's it. So it keeps track daylight hour, night, night. And with that, you can actually pinpoint where the bird went, but you have to catch that bird again. So everyone was like, yay, great, now we have a much less invasive way of doing this. After around 5 years of doing it, part of doing it isn't just saying we need to do this to get the data, it's also saying, well, what's the impact on the birds? We figured out that there was a 12% extra mortality rate for birds we put geolocators on. So then we stopped putting geolocators on birds that we didn't absolutely need to put geolocators on. And there are certain situations where you need it. For example, a bird's about to go extinct. You know where they spend their summers because they're in the United States, they're great. We have no idea where they're spending their winters. They're all if their population's going down and their population's going up in the US, we need to figure out where we need to go to conserve in Central or South America. So for the couple of years that we have a slightly higher mortality rate, figuring out where they go so we know what actions to take is unfortunately worth that risk. So now we don't just put geolocators on everything, which people were doing for a while because they thought, hey, no risk. Now we know there is a risk, so it's much more mitigated.
So what's the typical home range of these birds? Does it vary? Does that impact like how likely you are to catch
That
the
is
same
a
bird?
great question. So, all the birds that we work with, except for great catbirds, are resident birds. So they do not migrate.
Okay.
So during the breeding season, especially in cities where they have smaller territories, they're going to be very, very tightly restricted to that area. They might go off for an hour or two to go feed, but say James Street Park, you might have 3 pairs of robins there. You will see that same 3 pair of robins there every day. You might not see them there every second of that day, and you will also see a bunch of other robins come and go. But those 3 robins will be there. Now during the not breeding season, they expand their territory a little bit. So you might see them less frequently in the winter. Catbirds migrate, so they'll be gone. They expand their range up to like 2 or 3 kilometers. But then breeding season comes back, they almost always come right back to where their territory is. What's even more interesting, migratory birds. They fly, say, northern Canada, then to the south of South America. When they fly back up to their breeding range in northern Canada, still use the exact same territory. So there is very, very high site fidelity for where these birds are. That's why geolocators work, because like I said, we need to recapture the birds. If a bird that was breeding in Ohio went and flew down to South America and then ended up in Indiana, relatively close, we wouldn't recapture that bird again. So you have to have birds that go right back to exactly where you caught them in order to have any statistically high chance catching them.
I'm just thinking in between like Patterson Park and Druid Hill Park.
Yeah, so Patterson Park and Druid Hill Park are a little bit far, but like here at Patterson Park, you might occasionally see the birds that we banded in each spot, which is why I was explaining earlier, we need to have each spot that we band birds consistently at least 1 kilometer apart. Because if they were like 500 meters apart, there would be too much overlap. So at least 1 kilometer apart, and especially during the breeding season, that's going to mean that you might, especially if there's like a bird feeder around or something like that, you might see the birds like once every couple of weeks from the other place, but 99 times out of 100, you're just going to see your birds.
So are doves migratory?
Mourning doves, which other type of dove we get here, are not. They will be here year-round.
So we have some nests, and we're trying to figure out is the same doves are coming back
Yep.
and using those
So
same.
it is likely. The other thing is that there is relatively high mortality in cities for birds for a couple of reasons. A, cats. B, window strikes. But there is an excess of food in cities, and especially for things like mourning doves and pigeons, there's an excess of nesting territory because they like resting on traditionally cliffs, but buildings are cliffs. So their population is able to go really high because they can just reproduce like crazy, and they have lots of food so the babies can grow up fast. So even though the mortality rate is higher, they can just reproduce so fast. But that's one of the really cool things about this project is you have the same bird, the doves, you're like, I wonder if they're the same birds, maybe they are. With this project, you get the birds color banded, you know that's the same birds. Some of the cooler stories that you hear are like you go back to someone's yard the next year, they tell you, they've given the birds names, and they're like, oh, Joni and Steve are in a fight. they've been apart for 2 days. They really anthropomorphize it, but I mean, it might not be scientific, but it's great because it's getting people excited about the birds that they're seeing. And if they just see a bird and they think, huh, I wonder if that's the same bird, I'll never know, maybe they're a little interested in it, but they're not following it like a soap opera, like you can if you know it's the exact birds.
So you just mentioned pigeons, and it just made me realize you haven't mentioned pigeons once, which are the quintessential kind of urban bird, right?
So that is,
I would think that'd be 90% of what you're getting.
pigeons, I've only caught one pigeon so far this year.
Huh.
I caught a lot of mourning doves, and I catch a ton of house sparrows. But one of the goals of my project is to help people realize pigeons are very visible. There's thousands of other birds around you that are just as common as pigeons, maybe not just as common, but almost as common as pigeons, that are right there. It's going to keep your eye open for.
So do you do anything near the, you had one site like Masonville Cove, was that Masonville Cove?
Yes, so at Masonville Cove,
So do you get any water birds like gulls or
so
something?
I haven't started banding there yet. So the types of net that we set up, if a gull hit that net, the net would have a gull-sized hole in it. So gulls, you have to use a much sturdier type of net. Usually they actually use rocket nets to catch them, which are exactly what you're thinking. You have little weights at the end, a big, thick neck in the middle, shoot it. Or you can use what's called Q-traps, which are just like, you put food on the ground, the gulls come in with a big net, and whoosh right over the top of them. But I expect to catch some different birds there. We might start catching there one day in June for their BioBlitz, but that is still up in the air whether or not I'm actually going to participate in that, just for logistical reasons. But then we will be starting to catch there in October, which we'll see if the weather participates, because October can be 70, it can be 30, we'll see. And if absolute worst, we'll start there next spring. But yeah, we definitely catch different species of birds based on where we are in the city. So any other questions? All right, well thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for telling us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really great, Eric. Thanks.
When will you know for sure if we're going to do June 7th at Change Park?
I will post it on my Facebook page.
Okay.